of philosophy of mind, epistemology, and feminist theory, and has recently become interested in the philosophy of religion. She is the editor of the Philosophers Without Gods, Meditations on Atheism and the Secular Life, the book out there that contains her own autobiographical essay, For the Love of Reason. Please welcome Dr. Louise Antony.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I hope that the organizers don't demand their money back at the end of this talk. I think some people are going to think I've come here under false pretenses. I have a written out talk, but I have been so affected by so many different things that have happened during the conference that I am tempted to read just a part of it and then go off book, which is very dangerous, especially in terms of my using, not using up all of the time so that there's no time for questions. But I'm going to give it a try, and I'm going to watch my watch. So how long can I go, Bill? We're about 10 minutes late starting, so about an hour? Okay. Yeah. Okay. The first thing I want to do is say something that I think nobody in the history of the universe could possibly predict. I want to say to Dan Dennett, I agree with everything you said. Only a few of you will realize, Dan Ryder maybe will realize how unpredicted that announcement was. Okay, so I'm a philosopher and I have a bunch of friends. And my friends, many of them, have very strange views. I have a friend who believes that I am not fully present here. There's only an infinitesimal temporal part of me that is fully present. I have friends that think that in addition to the universe in which we live, there are countless, literally, non-denumerably many other universes, just like ours, except that they're not the ones that we live in. I have friends, in fact, I have a very good friend, a friend to whom I am married, who believes in dualism, that there's a body and a soul. This person, by the way, is not a theist. It's not a theist. You don't have to be a theist to believe in dualism. Probably the leading dualist in philosophy today is David Chalmers, who is an atheist. Okay. My point is that these weird philosophical differences that we have, I don't believe any of those doctrines, but these weird philosophical differences we have doesn't in any way preclude our being friends. The friendships I have with people are based not on metaphysical views, but they're based on common values, shared enthusiasms, commitment to common projects. Those kinds of things, I want to argue, have nothing to do with your metaphysics. And what I want to suggest is that the difference, the fundamental difference between atheists is in their metaphysics. And that is a difference that does not signify. It doesn't have the implications that I think both a lot of theists and a lot of atheists think it has. And it shouldn't stand in the way of our making common cause on a number of extremely important ethical and political and social issues. Now, one of the things that I think not determine is your meta-ethics. This is a piece. This is just a screenshot of a piece that I wrote for the New York Times. They have a blog series called The Stone, in which philosophers are invited to sort of mouth off about various things. And this is a piece that I wrote a little over a year ago, arguing against the view that Chris just articulated. That is, I argue that it does not follow from naturalism, it does not follow materialism, it does not follow from atheism, that you have to be a nihilist. You can be as morally realist as anybody else. The only way you get moral nihilism from atheism is if you accept a premise that many theists want to insist on, which is that the only possible way of grounding moral value is in the dictates of an authoritarian being. If you don't believe that, there's simply no argument from theism to morality or from atheism to the non-objectivity of morality. So I can give anybody who's interested the link to this. I won't try to go through that argument now. That would be a whole different paper. Okay, let's see. Now, I'm sorry, tech person, I need to get back to my text at this point. Oh, there we go. Right, good. Thank you. You can turn off the projection. Okay, so I have interest in a number of political issues. One of them is the Middle East, the current Middle East crisis. And a reporter who I respect quite a lot, Chris Hedges, wrote a book. I just came across this in the bookstore, and I was disturbed by it. It's called I Don't Believe in Atheists. And I thought, well, what do you mean? You mean you don't know there are any, or what are you talking about? So I started reading. I read the back cover, and this is what it says. It says, the battle between these new atheists, and he has in mind the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as fundamentalists engages two bizarre subsets of American culture. One distorts the scientific theory of evolution, applying it to the complex social, economic, and political systems it was never designed to explain. The other insists that the six-day story of creation in Genesis is fact, and Jesus will descend from the sky to establish the kingdom of God on earth. Neither God nor science, however, will protect us from the destructive forces within human history and human nature. We are not progressing morally as a species. We are not headed toward uplands of sunlight and harmony, collective salvation. The technological advances made by human societies have empowered in equal measure those dedicated to preserving and protecting life, and those dedicated to violence and industrial slaughter. To my surprise, I found that I agreed with everything that I just read. Everything I just read. So what I'm going to do now is, I said in my talk that I was issuing a challenge to theists and a challenge to atheists. I think I'm going to skip the part where I challenge theists, because I'm guessing there aren't too many theists in the audience. If there are, I'd be happy to tell you what the challenge is. Well, I guess I can say it kind of quickly. I think that theists need to help normalize atheism. They need to be disturbed, properly disturbed, by stories, the personal stories, some of which we heard from earlier this morning from Aruna. Stories which I bet a lot of you could tell about ostracism and maybe loss of livelihood and other sorts of consequences. They need to prevent that from happening. They need to protect the institutions of a genuinely civil, secular society. There was a recent blog post. I don't know why that's there. There was a recent blog post on the Huffington Post in which the editor actually for Religious Affairs said he publicly supported a young school student who protested the display of the Ten Commandments in the public schools. This was in Moldau, Oklahoma. I applaud religious people coming out and saying what he said. Now you want to know what he said. Sorry. He said, Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion, because if they do, it takes the interpretation of religious texts and guidance on the religious life out of the hands of religious leaders and into the hands of the government. Now, that's an argument that I heard when I was growing up in a Catholic home. He continues, the Establishment Clause was at least as concerned with the protection of religion as of government. So I challenge theists to come out more strongly and publicly about the need to take religion out of government and to leave it in the hands of religious people. That's my challenge to theists. I could say if I'm invited to address a gathering of theists, I'll have a longer talk. But I think I'm going to leave it there for now and turn instead to the so-called new atheists. And I'm going to be focusing on Sam Harris, whose writings, I have to say, disturb me deeply, deeply. They disturb me mainly because of the political implications of what he said. So let me just emphasize again one point that it's important to me to emphasize. That is, metaphysics doesn't determine your ethics. In fact, it doesn't even determine your meta-ethics. And I'm grateful to Dr. DeCross for, I'm sorry, did I get your name right? For explaining what ethics was. But just because you're religious, you don't have to endorse divine command theory, which is the theory that what's good is good because God commanded it. Many religious people reject that. Many religious people find that repulsive for the same reasons that a lot of you find it repulsive. But it also doesn't follow that if you're an atheist, you have to repudiate the existence of objective moral truth. You just don't. It just doesn't follow. As I said, you need that premise that you would have in common with the divine command theory, that the only thing that could make morality objective is if there's some kind of enforcer of moral commands. So what I want to say to my fellow atheists is to avoid replacing religious fundamentalism with atheist fundamentalism. I get very upset when I read Dawkins or Harris talking about atheists believe, or what you believe if you're a naturalist or a materialist. I was disturbed when Chris did that. Because the point of fact is there is no consensus among people that think about what the implications are of naturalism, or by naturalism I mean the view that everything that is possible to know is amenable to some kind of scientific investigation. You don't have to. You don't have to. Those views do not commit you to any particular view on ethics. Now, I'm sorry. So one of the things that I find disturbing in, say, Sam Harris's writings is what I think of as philosophical naivete. Harris makes it out that if you supernaturalism, and if you reject dualism, and you reject the authoritarianism of divine command theory, that what you're left with is a view that in philosophy is called consequentialism. That's the view that what makes something good or bad is the goodness or badness. What makes an action good or bad is the moral, what makes an action good or bad is the consequences of doing that action. Now, it's a position, it's an intuitive position. One version of this position is what's called hedonic consequentialism, or utilitarianism, that says that the good we're trying to maximize is something like human happiness or human flourishing. But there are other forms of consequentialism too. The main thing, though, is that consequentialism is not the only option in moral theory. There's also a family of theories called deontology, and that's a family of theories that appeals to ethical rules. Now, traditionally, deontological views have problems with some kind of cases, and consequentialist views have problems with other kinds of cases. So a deontologist like Kant, for example, who, though he claimed to believe in God, it's not a God that any religious fundamentalist would recognize as a very abstract. Kant argued that morality emerges from the rational activity of human beings ourselves. That what we understand to be right is a function of our recognizing some facts about ourselves and our fellow creatures. Namely, that we have the power to decide what our ends are going to be. Unlike animals that are not rational, whose ends are set for them by biology, the only thing they strive for are the things that it tells them they have to have, we human beings with rationality can contrive new ends. We can conceive new ends, and we can conceive new ways of organizing the material world in order to achieve those ends. Well, Kant argued in a very complicated argument that I'm not sure I quite understand, that somehow our own appreciation of our valuing of our own ends gives us rational insight into the fact that other creatures like ourselves value their own ends. And we want to be able to act autonomously to pursue our ends. We need to acknowledge that other creatures like ourselves have an equal right, an equal claim to be able to realize their ends. He developed this argument in a work where he issued 3 different, they're supposed to be equivalent formulations of his ultimate moral principle, the one that's easiest to understand, is the one that says, never treat another person merely as a means, but always as an end in itself. I happen to think that that goes a really long way in systematizing our moral judgments. Now, that ethical system runs into trouble when you get a case like this. There's a toddler, innocent toddler, walking across the control table in DEF CON 4, or wherever the place is in Virginia or Washington where all the buttons launch a nuclear war, and the toddler is about to put its chubby little hand on the button that will launch a nuclear strike. Okay? And we can suppose that if this strike goes off, millions of people are going to die, maybe there'll be retaliation, maybe there'll be the end of civilization, billions of people will die or be affected. Right? Under those circumstances, Professor Immanuel Kant, would you be justified in shooting the toddler to prevent her from getting to the button? And let's assume that's the only way you can prevent the toddler from getting to it. Well, gosh, you know, what do you guys think? Can you shoot the toddler? It's a toddler. Did I tell you how cute it was? I should have shown you a picture. It would take a really doctrinaire Kantian not to say, yes, you have the right to shoot the toddler in those circumstances. On the other hand, consequentialism, which says the right action to perform is the one that has the best consequences in terms of promoting value, whatever you take that to be, whatever method you use to determine what value is, the action that maximizes that is the right one. Well, consequentialism has trouble with judgments about fairness and justice. And by the way, we share with our primate cousins a very, very native concern for fairness. We get very upset when things are unfair. We behave irrationally. We will pay money to redress an unfairness, even if the unfairness doesn't cost us anything. We will pay a penalty. That's called disinterested malevolence, right? Paying, $1 million for a system to detect welfare fraud when the value of welfare fraud that's over the same period that you're detecting it is only $100,000. We'll say, I don't care, I want to screw those people to the wall, those cheaters, those freeloaders. So I think there's a very strong scientific argument that as a matter of fact, we care a lot about fairness. And consequentialist theories have trouble capturing the intuitions that depend on that. So suppose that there's a riot in the town, there's been some kind of a murder in the town, and it's gotten people very upset, and they're getting very agitated, and a mob is forming, and social order is about to break down unless you, the sheriff, camp with the perpetrator of the crime. Now let's suppose that there's somebody who just wandered into town, a drifter, nobody knows him. Let's suppose he has no family, he has no friends, nobody would know if he lived or died. He's not very smart, he's not creative, he's not going to make any contribution to human society. What if you pin the crime on that guy and get him executed real quick? Now arguably, and if you don't see this, I can details until it comes out right, arguably, there would be more human happiness if the mob were dispersed, the temper of the town cooled down, and order was restored, than there would be if you let this guy live. So it looks like the utilitarian calculus says, well, you just have to weigh him up, right? Kill an innocent guy, scapegoat an innocent guy, let the crowd wreak havoc on the town. Well, how many people think it's just obvious you should just scapegoat the innocent guy? Is that a good thing to do? Most people think, no, he's innocent. There should be something just about the punishment. The punishment should fit the crime. It should be attached to the person who actually is guilty of the crime, who's responsible for the crime, even if it would promote a lot of happiness for some person to be scapegoated. Now, this is a really fundamental divide in ethical theory. So I get really upset when I read Sam Harris say, I will agree that about values, about meaning, morality, and life's larger purpose are really questions about the well-being of conscious creatures. Value, therefore, translates into facts that can be understood scientifically. Well, that's taking a stand on a very substantive, deep, and difficult philosophical question and pretending like it just follows from respect for science. It's just not true. It doesn't follow. It's going to remain, if we get rid of all religion, it's going to remain a very difficult question and a question about which people are going to disagree, what the basis of value is, how we put together our intuitions about happiness and goodness and our intuitions about fairness. Right? Those are always going to be very difficult, contentious issues. And what is our alternative to just stipulating an answer? Well, it's going to be something like talking to each other, trying to come up with arguments, trying to deduce consequences from our intuitions and testing them against other people's intuitions. It's going to be a very complicated, dialogic process that's going to require a lot of mutual respect and a willingness to hear what other people are saying. That's not what I'm getting from Sam Harris. I'm getting him saying, once we get rid of this silly religion, we'll be all rational and scientific, and everything will be great. We'll just have to figure out what the values are, totem up, see which actions are going to do what, and then we're done. Okay, the other problem I have with that statement is that it seems to me it's completely ahistorical. It shows no appreciation whatsoever about the role that science has played in our history in rationalizing the most heinous crimes. I mean, just a couple of examples. I'm sure you can all, when you think about it, can think of many more. Let's talk about the 1930, the so-called Tuskegee study, the officially titled Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilism in the Negro Male. This was a study that was conducted from 1932 to what? Can anybody guess what the date is or know what the date is? When did they stop it? 1972. 1972. In the 1970s, they were still allowing black men who had syphilis to go untreated. Penicillin was discovered in 1947. Scientists who claimed to be doing this out of pure love of knowledge were subjecting people who could have been cured to this horrible, horrible disease, right? Science said that was okay. 33 states in the United States had laws that permitted the involuntary sterilization of people who were deemed to be dysgenic. The eugenics movement, which got a hold in the United States in the 1900s, and was the model, by the way, for various Nazi eugenics programs, it led to the sterilization estimated around 65,000 Americans, almost all sterilized against their will or without their knowledge. And by the way, it wasn't just the feeble-minded, whatever that means. Here were the conditions that could legally warrant the states taking your reproductive capacities away from you without your consent. Alcoholism, epilepsy, being blind or deaf or having another disability, never mind whether your deafness or blindness to do with genetic factors or whether it was trauma or something or disease. If you were blind or deaf, you were not fit. Poor people, people on welfare. The idea that people on welfare, poor people, are different kinds of people from us, that's deeply offensive. But science has stepped in and said, well, they're poor because they're just not very good utility maximizers. What can I tell you? Promiscuous women. If you were deemed promiscuous, if you were classified as promiscuous, you got sterilized. Not your Johns, by the way. They were left to be completely potent. Criminals, and here's one I didn't know about. Children who were the victims of rape. So even though scientists were supposed to be in charge of this, there was a kind of magical theory of moral taint that suggested that if you were the product of rape, that you somehow carried the criminality in you. So children who were the victims of rape were also sterilized. This is a weird thing to say here, but God preserve me from technocrats who know how human life can be made better through science and get in power and get the chance to promulgate their particular views about how life can be better, their particular group of scientists who they think are the ones that are moving in the right direction. and who then perpetrate authoritarian tyrannical practices on the rest of us. Okay, the second thing that bothers me a lot about what Sam Harris said, and this gets to, this addresses a point that came up this morning. I don't think that there's any particular epistemology that goes along with the denial of the supernatural. Epistemology, like metaethics, highly contested area in philosophy. Highly contested area in philosophy. There are two schools of thought that are particularly in contention. One is an a prioristic epistemology that says we use our intuitions about what's good evidence for what, about when a belief is justified, and we use those intuitions to construct a prescriptive program about how you ought to base your beliefs on evidence. There's another school of thought, and these aren't the only two. No, epistemology should be naturalistic, and that's actually a view that I subscribe to. On this view, and it dates back to a professor who had been at Harvard for his career, Willard Van Orman Quine, this is the view that the questions we ask about knowledge are continuous with questions that scientists ask about human capacities. So I believe very strongly that epistemology, our theory of knowledge, especially our theory of our theory about how we ought to form beliefs, that theory should be informed by a pretty thoroughgoing understanding of how human cognition works. Now here's the irony. Quine, for his own philosophical ideological reasons, did not think there could be a science of psychology. He thought there could only be a science of behavior, i.e. behaviorism, where you simply correlated external circumstances and behavioral consequences. Now, I have that debate with anybody who wants to have it, but let me just say that an awful lot of psychologists and people who are committed to cognitive science in general, like Noam Chomsky, are pretty convinced that behaviorism is empirically inadequate. It cannot explain the data it's supposed to explain. As I said, I'd love to have that fight with somebody. Or argument, we don't have to fight. Don't have to hit each other. At any rate, if you take that seriously, if you take that idea seriously, that in order to know how we ought to form our beliefs in a warranted way, in a way that's likely to lead to the truth, we need to find out about human cognition. Well, it turns out it's a little bit disturbing. It turns out that we are not rational creatures through and through. For one thing, our beliefs are not all based on evidence. And this is something that Dan and I may disagree about. I think that the scientific data show that our ability to pick up language, our ability to understand the psychologies of other creatures who have psychologies, and many other things, our understanding of kinematics, of how objects move through space, our folk physics, our conception of what an object is, our conception of what animals can do as opposed to non-animals, all of those things, I think the evidence shows, are innate, born knowing that stuff. The reason you cannot teach an ape to use language is not because the ape is stupid. The ape is really smart. Coco was really smart. When she was 2 or 3 years old, she was much smarter by any measure that you could use than a human infant. But a human infant comes with an unfair advantage. A human infant comes stocked with knowledge about the normal form of human languages, about the general structure of languages. And that makes the project of picking up a language on the basis of stuff that they hear their conspecifics say much, much easier. Well, it turns out that this kind of shortcut, right, if you've got knowledge about what the overall structure of a language is, it's going to be a much faster thing. You're going to have a steeper learning curve than if you have to figure everything out from, as it were, the raw data. So we have that advantage. Well, it turns out we have lots of advantages cognitively. When scientists lunch, there's good stuff on TV. They're going to die. There isn't time to carefully select the hypothesis that best fits the data. They have to take shortcuts. And the shortcuts they take have to do with unjustified assumptions like the simpler theory is more likely true. A theory that involves positing 4 or 5 different kinds of entities is more likely to be true than a theory that posits a new entity for every time this phenomenon occurs. There's no way of justifying those kinds of values or principles on the basis of evidence because, as David Hume showed in the 1770s, you need those principles in order to derive anything from evidence. If you don't have those principles, you cannot rationally use evidence. Okay, now those are sort of general ways in which unjustified, that is to say, beliefs or biases or principles we have that do not depend directly on evidence. They don't depend on evidence at all. They're what came in our head. That's one way in which the model, I think, that Sam Harris has of science as something that is simply a mechanical calculation of data. Well, that's one way in which it's wrong. Another way it's wrong is that there's a lot of research now coming out of social psychology. Many of you may have seen Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, or Dan Ariely's book, Predictable Irrationalities. There's lots and lots of evidence that the so-called rational man of classical economics does not exist. There aren't human beings that are like that. We do not behave in the way that this picture suggests we do by making decisions on the basis of careful consideration of the evidence. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It turns out it's the only possible thing. We could not possibly proceed in the way that Harris suggests science proceeds, by gathering up all the data and then kind of deducing a theory from it, or making a decision by lining up all the options and carefully considering the consequences of each one. We don't have time again. So it's very human limitations of our physical embodiment that make that model a bad model. Okay, now the other thing I want to talk about, and this is the part that really gets me mad, is the political naivete of Harris's position. Sam Harris is Islamophobic. He thinks he is bigoted about Islam. He that a religion that has anywhere from between 1.3 billion and 2.2 billion, I've seen lots of estimates, people in this world, on this planet, subscribe to is, let's see, what does he call it? Well, he says in The End of Faith, Islam, more than any other religion human beings have devised, has all the makings of a thoroughgoing cult of death. He advocates profiling. You can look on his blog. He's got a post called In Defense of Profiling. And by the way, profiling is irrational by any acceptable epistemology. Because if you've got a gazillion people who are Muslim or a gazillion people who are black, and the amount by which knowing their religion or their race raises the probability that they're a terrorist is infinitesimal, then you're far more likely to unfairly stigmatize innocent people than you are to catch a guilty person. It simply doesn't raise the probability enough to make it rational. Even if it were rational, it's immoral. It's immoral. It's immoral to sacrifice the rights of innocent people for the sake of some perceived degree of increase of safety. Okay, so let me say why I think this is naive. To think that the conflicts that are most salient to us now are the result of religious conflict or conflicts in worldview is to buy a piece of propaganda that the US government is very consciously, very deliberately, very systematically promoting to disguise the real motives for our involvement in the Middle East, which is, of course, preserving of our oil. I'll say we and our now, and I mean Americans. I don't mean to be implicating my Canadian friends. The fact of the matter is that, back in the 50s and 60s, not all of you are old enough to remember this, the big bugbear was communism. And one of the things about communism, by the way, was that it was atheistic. But communism was the reason why we had to do that we did as a foreign power, everything. And it justified anything. It justified dropping napalm on innocent villagers. It justified dropping white phosphorus on innocent Salvadorans and Nicaraguans. It justified taking leaders that we didn't like violently from power and installing our own puppets. Here's just a partial list of US-supported dictators. Aruna talked about, or Dr. Sahai talked about Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan. He's a US guy. He was an ally, good ally of the US. Manuel Noriega in Panama, he was a US creature. Of course, he overstepped and then he was out, and that's a danger you have to take account of if you are thinking about becoming a US puppet. Saddam Hussein was an American creature. He was our, until again, things started getting bad, and that in his case, it was, he began talking about, I mean, yes, he gassed the turds. It was terrible. He oppressed millions. He murdered millions. He was a terrible, terrible man. That's not why he was deposed by the US. It's because he wanted to have independent trade relations with people other than the US-sanctioned partners. Diem, Thieu, and Key in Vietnam, the Shah in Iran, Pinochet, who was, Carmen was speaking about so movingly last night, Armas in Guatemala. Fidel Castro tried to have warm relations with the United States, but the United States rebuffed him, and he had no alternative but to enter the Soviet orbit. Of course, the Soviets, atheists, by the way, own horrible projects in their own propaganda. So I'm not saying the US is uniquely evil. What we are right now is uniquely powerful, right? Uniquely powerful. And this gives rise to a different kind of fundamentalism. And this is a fundamentalism that I think the atheists, the new atheists, share with a lot of religious fundamentalists, and that is American exceptionalism. This is the idea, and Americans have it. Americans have it. This is the idea that there is something unique about the United States. And it doesn't have to be that God gave us this unique status. Some people say that. Others say it's because of our Enlightenment values. Bullshit. Okay, now I feel like I'm in a rally, so. American exceptionalism is the unquestioned faith, and it is faith, there's no evidence, that the United States government and the United States leaders alone, among all of the other governments and leaders history has ever known, have noble motives in their foreign policy and are honest. They tell us exactly why they're doing what they're doing. And this ethical purity and this exceptional goodwill is supposed to give the United States the unique right to do a whole bunch of things that are pretty astonishing when you think about it. We arrogate to ourselves the right to make war on other countries, to depose leaders that we don't like, to decide who lives and who dies. After September 11th, our president ordered a bombing of Afghanistan. How stunning would it have been if he had said, we are a country ruled by law. By law. So we call on the international community to help us to find this criminal, to bring him to our court or a court of international law to be tried as a criminal because we believe in the rule of law. That would have been stunning. But instead, what we did was we poured bombs. We carpet bombed Afghanistan. All credible estimates say that more civilians, innocent civilians, died in those bombing raids than died in the Twin Towers. Wrong for terrorists to use innocent people as their pawns in a political game. Why is it okay for the United States to do it? Well, I want there to be time for questions. Or did you take that into account? Okay. Okay. I'm an American, by the way. I mean, I have a little essay on patriotism where I try to figure out how patriotism can be a virtue. What I think of patriotism, the other thing you need to know about me is I'm a cheap weep. If I get at all emotional, I start tearing up. So I apologize for that. I don't mean to be doing this for dramatic effect. But I think that my responsibility I think that the right attitude for a patriot to have is, this is my country, like this is my child. If my child goes and harms someone else, I have to do two things. I have to make restitution to the person harmed, and I have to get the child to take responsibility. That's what a good parent does. I think that's what a good patriot does. So that's my view of patriotism. I think it's very, very important now that we not allow this lie to be perpetrated, that the conflict in the Middle East has something to do with religions. There's an excellent book that I recommend to all of you by Robert Pape, or Pape, I'm not sure how he pronounces his name, P-A-P-E, which is a compendious study of suicide bombers. He demonstrates that well more than half of the people that are involved in suicide bombing are completely secular. What he finds that all suicide bombers have in common is that they are parts of organizations and that they are trying to remove foreign occupying their soil. My solution to terrorism is bring home the troops. I'll stop there and let you guys ask some questions. Thank you.
Canadians, thank you for your guts.
Not all of us. Not all of us.
There are more of me.
Speak for all 34
This one Canadian thanks you for your gut. Could you give a quick, if it's okay by you, a quick response to the case for or against Israel?
Israel. Okay. Here I want to inject a little bit of personal history because I feel that, well, I'm insecure about talking about this topic because I'm not Jewish. My husband was raised in an Orthodox home. He's Jewish. And he has been a public defender of Palestinian rights and a critic of Israel since we first got to know each other. I think since the invasion of Beirut in 1981, 82. That's what really put him over the edge. I think the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a very familiar kind of conflict. European people, for what may have been important reasons, went to a country and displaced the population that was there and claimed the land as their own. That's what Europeans do, right? That's what Europeans do. They commit. Now, in past history, when you didn't have the internet and photographs and stuff, it was easier to get away with this. In past, European peoples would just commit genocide. That's what my ancestors did in North America, and other people's ancestors did in South America, and what the British did in Australia and New Zealand. But that wasn't really an option, so they were displaced. What you've got is a fundamental conflict between two groups of people who claim that they have a right to the land. Now, insofar as Israelis appeal to lines in Genesis to justify their claim to the land, I say, get out there and bash that religion. That is right? But secular Israelis will say the same thing. They'll say, we deserve this land because of the Holocaust. Well, spell out the inference to me. Why aren't you occupying Germany? The Arabs didn't do this. So I think that, and what I think and the United States we have been exceptional in this regard. We have unfailingly endorsed everything that Israel does. There are, just look at UN General Assembly votes. There are gazillion votes where somebody will say, I vote that we resolve that Israel violated such and such paragraph of such and such charter, and they will have, and the vote will be 100 and whatever it is, however many nations there are, to 2, over and over and over again. The United States' support for Israel, and the United States tolerates illegal settlements. Many of these settlements are lawless. Actually, Chris Hedges, I first started reading Chris Hedges when he filed what he calls his Gaza diary. He lived for 15 years in the Middle East, and he documented things that were going on, like Israelis, I'm sorry, this is awful, Israeli soldiers shooting children for sport. Documented it. And the United States tolerates that. That's why. There are people in the Middle East that hate the United States. That's why. That's what I have to say about Israel.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just wanted to mention something. I think you may have been oversubscribing or over-ascribing something that Sam Harris has been going on about. I don't think he's ever been saying that we have to get rid of religion, that we have to force it out of this world. I don't think he's ever been doing that. And I understand you have valid concerns about what he's been saying, but I just wanted to rein you perhaps a little bit on that, just so that you're, well, it just seems a little bit too much. I don't think any of the Four Horsemen, or Sam in particular, has ever been saying that we have to forcibly get rid of religion. I don't see that at all in what he's been saying. And the other thing is, I think you've been channeling Edward Said a little bit too much today here.
Edward Said is not
Said.
radical enough for me.
I'm
out there.
In his last conversation with Christopher Hitchens, Said said that he believed that America should be disbanded, unwound, become a country. That's how much he hates America. And if you're saying you don't think he was strong enough, well, gosh, where are you going to be going with that then?
Well,
so it's really tough to hear what you're saying. You have some very good points, but I think you allowed yourself to get a little bit beyond what was necessary. And that's all. I'd just like to rein you in a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Let me comment. I certainly didn't mean to say that Harris advocated people to leave their religion. If I said that, I misspoke. I repudiate that. Also, as far as Edward Said goes, when I say that I'm to the left of Edward Said, I mean that I felt that he was much more accommodationist about Palestinian demands than I think is just. I don't think I have to defend what he said. If he said that to Christopher Hitchens, I would like to to look it up, not to check you, but I'd like to see the context. But I don't feel that I have to defend what he said. I mean, look, I don't think Israel should be disbanded. There are such things as facts on the ground. I mean, good heavens, I don't want to have to give my house back to Native Americans. That would be awful. If justice demands that, well, wow, I'm being unjust, and I don't like that consequence. But so I don't advocate, removing all the Israelis or anything like that at all. Just am saying that Palestinian. All right, here's where I'm to the left. I would like to see Israel be a secular state. Israel is a theocracy. Until Israel is a state of all its citizens, and unless Palestinians have the same right to return to their actual homeland as Jews have to return to their pretend homeland, there's going to be a conflict. So that's where I disagree with Said, and I don't like what that you quoted.
Thank you very much for your talk. I think a lot of folks in the room are comfortable with the idea of COINTELPRO and American manipulation. So I don't want to conflate those issues with my question, which is back to Islam. Mm-hmm. So Harris talks about the idea, and he takes two extremes. He takes Jainism and he takes Islam, and he says the extreme of one means you become the more deranged you are as a Jain, the more passive.
I'm not getting the word.
Jainism, as I understand, you become more pacifist. So in your opinion, are there, I see faith or religion as a vehicle or a license to unlock some of the poisons of the human mind? Not always, but it can do it. So do you see religions varying in their ability to prevent that ethical discussion around the complexities of human ethics? Or do you see it actually perpetrating more violence and evil across the world? I think that's where Harris was coming from. Faith have more license to do that than others. So,
which are the ones that have less license to do that? Bearing in mind that the purpose of the New World invasion was the Indians. So what are the religions that don't have
and I guess that's what I'm asking you. Do you see them all sort of the same? That's my question.
Well,
or are they all equal?
Okay, I think they're all extremely various. And I think also that people in power are going to use whatever ideological tool they think is going to be effective to win support for their programs. You know, do you think that the brothers give a damn about abortion or gay marriage or any of that stuff? They don't care. But if they think it can stir up the base, they'll be, against it or for it, whatever they're supposed to be. I mean, that was the genius of what's his name's Southern strategy for Nixon, was tap into that insecurity and fear in the working classes and among the middle class. Tap into that, find out what they're afraid of, and make it right? And it's a perfectly tried and true technique. So I think that, you know, the people that are demonizing Islam right now, they need to go to some of the places that I go to. They need to meet some of the Muslims that I meet. I've been involved in coalition work against the first war in Iraq, the second war in Iraq, the sanctions in the middle, and, you know, this is the part that I didn't read. There were a lot of church people there. There were a lot of progressive Christians. There were a lot of Muslims that were very unhappy about what was being done in their name. You know, it's just like with any religion. If, you know, I don't see any possible case that could be made out that Islam is more inherently anti-intellectual or conducive to immoral behavior than, say, Christianity.
Hi, Louise.
Hi.
I'm Bill's brother.
Yeah, I know, Dave.
Dave, yeah.
Say A for me.
First thing I want to say is that you must have a great time going through customs on your way home.
They don't know.
Oh, well, that's good. They might now.
I'm in the closet. Actually, can I just quickly tell a funny story? I did speak at a peace rally once when I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and the next day I had to go on a flight. And I went to check in, and it turns out my flight had been canceled with me. So as I'm going through security, I get pulled out. I get selected for, you know, pat down and a special, they call me into a room and interview me. And I am just, truth be told, I'm ecstatic. I'm so happy. I'm thinking, I am getting hassled because of my politics, right? Okay, so it turns out that there's an automatic selection of anybody who purchases their ticket within an hour of when the airplane leaves, and that's why. So that's been my experience with it.
Yeah, that happened to me a couple of weeks too, for just setting off the machine once too many, because I have metal buttons. But anyway, I just took a few notes, and we talked about morality at the beginning, and I think without religion, well, first of all, I think morality is something we learn, and without religion, I think that's why we have poets, artists, people to express our level of morality and where we want to go. So I don't think religion is something we need. As a matter of fact, I think the world would be a better place once we get rid of decision-making based on superstition and, you know, fairies in the sky and all that other stuff. I just think the world would be a better place when that day comes.
Okay. I agree with the sentiment. I'm a big fan of reason. My collection of essays is called For Love of Reason. I really, really am high on reason. But two things. When we get rid of superstition, there's still an awful lot of room for disagreement, and disagreement about things that matter and can cause conflict. It's also the case that a lot of conflict comes not from disagreements about the facts, but about two different people wanting the same thing. Mm-hmm. That's not going to go away if we get rid of superstition. So I think that sources of conflict are all absolutely in place.
Okay. Then my question is, do you think that it would be better off if we allowed the decisions that we make to be based on foresight, imagination, and things of that nature? So I'll leave
well,
it
it depends. Different people with different foresight and different imaginations are going to come out with different things. There's no safe strategy here.
Well, I agree, but they don't have to be based on dogmatic principles.
No, I mean, look, I'm very fortunate to live in an environment, to work in an environment where it's perfectly okay for me to be an atheist. Most of my coworkers are atheists. The Christians feel under siege in my department. I don't think they are, but they feel that way. But we disagree about a lot of stuff, including politics, including science, what science to trust. Can I just comment on the thing about where morality comes from? That's an empirical, factual claim. And there's actually scientific investigation of this. And there's a lot of evidence. I'm not saying that you have to believe this. I'm not being an authority to tell you this is the way it is. There's a lot of evidence that there's a great deal of moral feeling that is innate. I mentioned studies of apes that show them displaying this disinterested malevolence I was talking about. It's also the case that very young children can distinguish between conventional morality and real morality. So if you ask a little Jewish kid who's been raised in an Orthodox home, if God said you didn't have to wear a yarmulke, would it be okay to wear a yarmulke? And the kid says, yes. If God said it's all right to kick somebody, would it be okay? The little kids say no. And if you ask them why, they say, because it would hurt them.
So I've got a question regarding morality too, specifically regarding Sam Harris. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the moral landscape, but he describes
Yes, I am very familiar. It's on
So
my iPad.
one of the principles that he says is that we should strive to achieve the greatest well-being for conscious creatures. And I'm just thinking, I just want to know why you think it's not good to use that as opposed to moral values such as killing all infidels and stoning non-believers to death, which appear in religious scripts.
Yeah, there are a lot of things I don't like. I don't like killing infidels, but there have been a lot of people killed by U.S. bombs and chemical warfare than have been killed by jihadists. There are more people killed from gunshots in the United States in a single year than there have been people killed by terrorist attacks since and including 2001. Now, let me just say something about well-being. I'm all for well-being. I'm all for happiness. I'm all for sensual happiness. I like food, you know, the whole thing. But I want to know who's calculating the well-being. Is it the Israelis that are going to tell us what the well-being of everybody is? Are they going to give the right kind of weight to the well-being of the Palestinians? I don't trust them to. I don't trust me to decide for anybody else what's in their well-being. That seems to me to be the basic principle of the Enlightenment, is that everybody has the authority themselves for determining this. And I am terrified of anybody that claims to be acting because they know what's good for everybody.
Oh, I'll make it quick. Mostly agree with what you said about Harris, but I do dispute the bit about science and morality a little bit. So I'll just give you a 2-3 sentence apologetic, then let you, smack it around unopposed. You brought up the example of...
I will analyze it. I won't smack it.
Fair enough. You brought up the example of kids being sterilized because they're the victims of rape. That is not justified by science. That's an irrational belief that is being carried under the banner of science. So couldn't I simply defend the argument by saying that's science poorly applied and not a failure of science instead?
Absolutely, but let me point out two things. Yes, it's science poorly applied. Pious, good religious people will tell you that the behavior of Christians is religion improperly applied. We've all got our understandings of the systems that give us a sense of value and purpose, and we resent it when other people tell us what they say. Now, the stuff about science poorly applied, the problem is those scientists, those bad scientists, got into power. They got to be the people that were in charge of figuring this out. There's no way of preventing that except by having a robust civil, secular society where people are properly empowered, and this means we need social justice, by the way, health care. There's no way that if you don't have properly empowered citizens, there's no protection against science being misapplied.
Am I right in thinking that you say that Islam is does not induce unethical behavior any more than Christianity or Judaism does?
I don't think it actually makes sense to talk about a religious system inducing behavior. Individual
You don't?
people, no, because first of all, there's too much variety. There's no canonization of Islam. Ask an Orthodox Jew and a Reformed Jew what their religion requires, what the doctrines are that a pious Jew believes. You'll get very different answers. If you ask a Catholic and a Protestant whether divorce is morally permitted or whether abortion is morally permitted, you'll get different answers.
What about a more broad sense, in the way that you can actually find figures on practices that are carried out by the vast majority of believers in a certain country?
Yeah, look, there are certainly people who do bad because of religious beliefs. The guy, I've forgotten his name, who killed the abortion doctors.
No, that their religion induces certain patterns of behavior.
That I don't understand that. I don't think
All right,
belief
let me
systems have agency.
Well, let me give you an example.
Belief systems realized in individual heads. So people do offer religious justifications. My bet is, first of all, most religious people would condemn those justifications, and secondly, the religious principle that they cite doesn't actually justify. They're under an illusion of them.
All right, here's an example. The widespread practice of systematically mutilating the genitals of children, cutting off the clitorises of girls, in Islamic countries in Africa and in parts of the country where Judaism is practiced, do you have the audacity to say that that is not directly attributable to the doctrine of their religion?
Oh yeah, that's an easy one.
So that actually is inducing.
Come on. Clitoridectomy, I mean, we'd have to go and cite some sources, and we could spend some time doing that if you want. Clitoridectomy is not routinely practiced in Islamic countries, and it's not prescribed by Islam. In Africa, it's a cultural practice that has nothing to do with their religion. There are plenty of cultural groups in Africa that practice female genital mutilation that have nothing to do with
What
Islam.
about genital mutilation in males in Judaism?
Yeah.
That's directly attributable, and that actually does have some.
I agree. And in Catholicism, they used to keep children from eating or drinking anything from midnight until the next morning when they received Holy Communion. Of course people do bad things in the names of religion sometimes. Of course they do, but grow up. People do bad things in the names of all sorts of ideas don't justify them.
I'm not saying I'm saying that the religion induces this bad behavior, that people do it and claim it's a religion. I'm saying that the religion itself induces the behavior.
I'm saying that's an empirical question. I want to see the evidence.